Hi, we're sisters Elaine and Brenda.
Welcome to the Body Wealth Podcast, a space for conversation about the wealth that really matters.
Your best health.
I'm so happy to have you here on the Body Wealth Podcast. How are you doing today?
I am doing well, all things considered. How are you guys?
Great.
We're good. So I want to start by letting you introduce yourself to our listeners. What would you like to tell them about yourself?
I am a DC native. I'm a mom. I am a lover of all things art and creative, and I really have a passion for people. So that's one of the things that I'm really inspired to do is, particularly for women of color, support them through their journeys. It's hard enough. The political climate is challenging. So, wherever I can support, I'm happy to do so.
Well, we are so glad you're here today with us, and we'll just go ahead and get started. In your late 20s, you started experiencing extremely painful cramps. How did you know it wasn't just regular period cramps?
So I've had period cramps, and at the onset, this felt very different. I had just had my daughter. She was probably about 8 months old.
No.
And I was literally doubled over in pain. I was at a cookout, and I was like, oh my gosh, I cannot move. And it felt very different for me. And I was just like, what is this? What's happening? I ended up going to the urgent care. And they said, oh, it's probably nothing. They sent me with a prescription for a heavy dose of Tylenol or something like that, and sent me on my way. It eventually subsided after probably about 24 hours. But then it happened again probably about a month later. And I was like, no, something is very, very wrong. And I ended up going to the ER again. And this time they did a ultrasound. And they told me, oh, you have cysts on your ovaries. And I was like, that was the first time I'd ever heard of it. It's like, okay, what is this? Is this, a long-term problem? She's like, oh, they'll go away on their own. They normally do. It's just a painful experience.
And so did they go away?
So what tends to happen is essentially it's almost like fluid builds up in the cyst, and they do go away on their own. They either shrink or sometimes they'll burst, which is far more painful. But eventually they did go down. I think I had one or two at a time. It wasn't as severe as some of the other cases I'd learned about later on. So I was grateful for that. But when I was in pain and literally doubled over, I could not move. And mind you, again, I have a newborn who still needs me for things. I'm just this feels so unproductive. I don't have time for this.
Did you, between these visits, see your regular OBGYN about this? Or
I didn't at the time.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I was hospitalized for the third time and they kept me that I was like, okay, this is clearly a thing. Because I was under the assumption of, oh, okay, so it'll go away. That's fine. But the third time I went, I was expecting more of the same. Give me my meds and send me on my way. But they told me my white blood cell counts were elevated. So they kept me for 48 hours. And I felt like I was being imprisoned. I was like, what is happening? There wasn't a lot of information flowing. They weren't being helpful to me, at least I felt. And they were telling me things like, oh, well, have you had any recent STD screenings? And it felt judgy in the moment. And they literally ran every panel they could ever run. And at the end of the day, it all came out clear as I knew it would. And I'm just like, okay, but about these cysts, I've had them before, but what is happening now? And essentially, she was saying, they have ovarian cysts that'll just go away. We're monitoring you, giving you antibiotics, making sure that things are fine. And after that point, I was discharged from the hospital, and I was like, okay, I need to go make an appointment with my gynecologist to figure out what is happening to me and how I can stop this, because it was painful. And at the point where I'm literally being hospitalized.
Right. Regularly.
That's a bit much.
Yeah. So you initially thought, oh, they're saying I have cysts, they're going to go away, and then I'll live my life. But the new ones were coming?
So they would fill and then either deflate or burst. And in that process of bursting, that's kind of when I would get that extreme pain.
Yeah.
And I think the last time I was in the hospital is when they burst. And over a period of the 48 hours that I was there, like the morphine wasn't doing anything for me. Like it was incredibly painful. And I was just like, I can't like continue to operate in this way. I have to get to the root of it. So while I was stuck in the hospital, I'm like, okay, I'm Googling everything. I am WebMD, like what's happening to me? I'm not really getting clear answers from the team. I was kind of left alone a lot, which was frustrating. But I started reading about ovarian cysts and then came across Polycystic Ovarian Syndrome, PCOS. And I was like, oh, maybe this is what I had, because I was looking at the list of symptoms and I was like, I have a lot of these things. So when I went to my gynecologist, I told them what had happened and, being in the hospital and all those things. And they were kind of, the doctor, I remember very vividly, he was like, nah, I don't think you have it. Yes, you have cysts, but, cysts can happen. So he started running down a list of things. He asked me, have I struggled to lose weight? I'm like, yeah, I have. Have you had facial hair? Like I have crazy facial hair and like it's uncomfortable. And, he kept going down this list and I'm just like, yeah, I got that. Not that one, but most of the other things. He's like, oh, well, maybe you do. It's just like,
It's so interesting to me, the people at the hospital and even your gynecologist were not the ones to listen to your symptoms and then bring this to you. You were the one who had to actually search it out and say, these are the symptoms I have.
Yeah. And from that point, I was officially diagnosed. I do have it.
Is there a test to confirm that, or they just, it's a list of symptoms?
By the time that we finished that conversation, he was like, well, yeah, it's likely that you do have it, after I ran down the entire list of things. I'm just like, okay, like the conversation left a bad taste in my mouth. I am telling you what I think is wrong with me, and you're kind of just being dismissive in a way that I didn't appreciate.
And I had to prove it to you. I can't just tell you, think about this.
Crazy. Literally had to tell you all of the things and the reasons why I thought. So I was armed with information just because I'd been researching. But from that point, I really just kind of went at it on my own and continued to do my own research and figure out ways to minimize the symptoms. So for me, it's really about reaching a bunch of like communities of folks, of women who have PCOS. They share information, they share their struggles and things like that. And that has been tremendously helpful for me.
So is there a medicine you take, or it's what you just do in your lifestyle to minimize the effect?
So for me, it was lifestyle change. One of the bigger things that I'd realized that was contributing to my flare-ups was diet. So I had to take a really good look at my diet and kind of reassess what I was putting in my body. Processed foods are terrible for the body overall, and particularly wasn't helping me. I'd also needed to lose some weight anyway. So one of the things that I did was I started researching bariatric surgery. And I ended up going down that path thinking, okay, well, at the very least, it will curb my appetite and be a real tool to kind of help me figure out the weight portion. And it helped tremendously.
Can you tell us what bariatric surgery is?
Sure. So it's like weight loss surgery. So I had the vertical sleeve 2018 and lost a good bit of weight. And shortly after that, I had another flare up and I was like, what is this? Thank goodness it wasn't as bad as when I was hospitalized. But from that point, I haven't had any flare-ups. So it's been, almost 5 years.
So did all the symptoms go away?
So no, I still get hairy. And sometimes I got to go, take care of those things. I got to go pluck my beard. But for the most part, that has been really instrumental in like reducing the symptoms. Like I know one of the other things that was particularly important to me that I was kind of keeping my eye on when I was pregnant was I was on the border for gestational diabetes. And in my research, I attributed that to PCOS because having insulin resistance is one of the symptoms. So it makes it harder to lose weight, but it also puts you in that category of potentially being at risk for type 2 diabetes. And I wanted to avoid that at all costs.
Yeah.
So I haven't had any real issues. I routinely go get my blood work done and all my levels are normal.
Great.
So for me, the juice was well worth the squeeze.
So did you have any medical provider along the way that actually helped you to figure this out?
No, a lot of it has been research on my own. And part of it for me has been that I wasn't really as trusting of the medical community because they weren't really embracing of my concerns. So it's just like, if I have to go alone and go figure out, what are people doing? How are they getting the support that they need? How are they overcoming like these flare-ups? Then for me, that was where I got answers to my questions. So I was heavy on the Facebook groups, and like there are a couple of others as well that are really helpful. And I always had a lens of caution just because the internet is free and abundant and anyone can provide advice. But I really did find community and resonate with women who were experiencing the same things that I was experiencing. And I used that as leverage to provide the information that I needed to my doctor to tell them what I needed in that moment.
Wow.
But how did you find the doctor that you trusted to do the bariatric surgery?
That was a referral. One of my friends had bariatric surgery and she had good success with it. So I asked her a bunch of questions about the process and how everything, was going like pre-op and post-op. And by that point, I felt comfortable enough. It took me time because it is not something that I entered into lightly. It's one of the things where I was like, okay, this feels like cheating. I don't know if I want to do this. I'm literally cutting up in my body. Maybe I could just work out. So I did have periods where I would just go work out, eat right, and the scale wouldn't move and I didn't feel the benefits. And I've been like throughout my life fairly active-ish. Like I did a triathlon when I was pregnant with my daughter.
Oh my
No way. Like for me, it wasn't like the movement and activity that was a challenge. It was the scale didn't move. What the foods that I was using to fuel my body just didn't cooperate with what I needed it to do. So at the end of the day, like the process of going through weight loss surgery is intense because you have to schedule nutritionist screenings, you have to go and do therapy appointments and things of that nature to ensure that it's not a Band-Aid cure, but a really holistic, robust, this is what you need to do. Like it's not just you get cut open, you have a smaller stomach and then you lose weight and everything's great. It's not that at all. You really have to look at, what are your triggers, the things that are really causing you to retain weight. And it was probably the first time that I'd actually reflected on all of the things that attributed to me being overweight. And I was like, okay, this is helpful. It's also the first time I'd ever met with a nutritionist and had a couple of sessions about, healthier food options, what to do when you're out in a restaurant, things of that nature. And particularly on the post-op side, it's now that you have a tinier tummy, you just can't eat the same things that other people eat just because, it will affect you differently. Vitamins are crucial to success and survival because you need to replace your nutrients in the ways that you can't get it through food. Protein is also important. So I really started to better understand food as it relates to the body and how to fuel my body for life and not just eating because, it's a Friday night. It's a good time. It's a celebration. And one of the things I realized is there aren't very many celebrations that I've attended that there isn't like a meal or a drink and things like that. So I'm like, okay, like I really had to change my relationship with food, and the surgery and the process of leading up to and post-surgery really kind of helped reorient that. And for me, it was the PCOS being the vehicle for me to start looking at my health differently. So like even now, as I've gotten older, I'm more aware of the things that I put in and on my body because that matters, right? And I really just want to make sure that things I'm eating are quality. Now, do I eat terrible things sometimes? Absolutely, because sometimes I don't feel like cooking. But I do cook more now. I do make sure that, I'm in a grocery store routinely picking up fresh ingredients. And most of my things are fresh so that, I'm not picking up the prepared foods just because it's easier.
Yeah. You're thinking about the choices that you make, and that's important.
Absolutely. And it's one of the things that's become really, really important for me, particularly to avoid those flare-ups, is just making sure that I am being more mindful of food and also my stress levels, because I think that the stress is the other part to the equation that really propels those flare-ups. I was in a very stressful period of my life when I started having my flare-ups. And I even started looking at what stress means to me, how I process traumatic things, what I do for self-care.
How did you figure out that stress was part of it, and how did you learn to manage it?
Well, I haven't learned to manage it. I am
A work in progress, as we all.
it is an art, not science,
Yeah.
right? Again, being very heavily invested in online communities kind of helped me think about like the holistic picture. And a part of that is assessing like what is adding stress to your life. I had a toxic job, so that it ended up going. And I noticed how I felt better in that moment. But I also needed to address things like, what are the habits that you pick up in one form or another? So that include toxic relationships. I found out and realized that my work relationships and situations mirrored my personal situations. And I was like, oh, it's toxic across the board. So how do we like cut out stress? When I look back and I'm like, my gosh, like I was under severe stress in every aspect of my life. And it really took me being intentional about reaching out and building community, be it online and in person, um, to start like rebuilding my life in a way that made sense to me, and adding and incorporating like healthier habits, learning to practice self-care, learning to say no, making sure that, I am mindful of the boundaries that I need to establish to make sure that I don't get pushed too far into the red zone, because the body keeps score of all the things, whether I'm paying attention to it or not. And it's very easy, particularly when you're busy and you're running around, you got a kid and you're doing a lot, to forget that you have to take care of yourself.
Right.
And that's hard.
It's hard, but one of the things I want to go deeper in is we often talk about managing stress. We got to manage stress. We got to manage stress. But it sounds like you also eliminated stress, because there are things that are stressors that we deal with that we have to manage. And then there are things that we're like, you know what, this is just not going to be in my life. So
Yeah.
how do you make those decisions?
I think for me, the most important thing is I have to routinely do an assessment of what it is that I'm looking for in life, and if my life currently reflects my desires, right? So for me, I had to look at all the things that I wanted. Like, am I happy? Is my relationship successful? Like, I'm very big on not being a public success and private failure. It matters to me that I'm authentic and it comes off as, hey, sometimes my life is a little raggedy, but that's okay, because I will give myself grace, right? I want others to give themselves grace too, because I think as a society, we hold each other to ridiculous standards that just aren't sustainable. So I had to stop subscribing to, I had to do all these things by this date. If I don't do it, then I'm a failure. I was like, but am I actually? I don't feel like one. Like, I have a bunch of great things going on for me. Like, I got multiple degrees. I got a good family. Like, I'm happy and I'm blessed. And I leaned more into those things and less into the check mark things, right? Like, you must have these things by X date, and if not, oh girl, sorry for you. And started leaning more into what felt more authentic for me. So that's, am I present in this moment? Am I enjoying my life? Are there things that I want to be doing? Are there hobbies that I could be starting or expanding on? And really kind of just embracing the fullness of life, and not just kind of settling for whatever life has handed me. Like, if I'm uncomfortable or upset or frustrated by something, then I can change it. Because for everything that didn't go well, it wasn't too late. I had an opportunity to start over and figure it out. And for me, like, that's how I live now. Like, I've changed jobs for that reason. I've gotten out of relationships for that reason. I will walk away from commitments, and I don't like doing that. So one of the things that has become really important to me is being very clear about what I commit to.
So has learning all of these things in your life altered the way that you raise your daughter at all?
Absolutely. Like, one of the biggest things that I want for her to know is that you have a safe space at home always. And give yourself grace. You're not supposed to have the right answers to everything. Failing is a part of the journey. So for school, like, she struggles with math in school. I'm like, okay, you're a phenomenal reader, and that comes naturally easy to you. So that's not your struggle, but math is. So let's lock in and practice and work hard so that you understand that, some things are worth working at, and that you'll be proud of yourself when you accomplish your goal because you put in the work, you took the time to get it right, you understood what it took to get there. It was not easy. And that is an important life lesson that I want her to learn is some things aren't easy, and that's okay.
And learning how to overcome difficult things is a great skill, to have for your life.
Don't be afraid to do hard things. I mean, like, Elaine and I started this podcast. I was scared.
We did not know what we were doing.
But we doubled down.
Or get better. It's that for me. I just want her, above all things, to be okay with looking at yourself in the mirror and just be happy. And part of my journey, I needed to figure out what made me happy. That's an inside job.
Yeah.
So I really had to figure out and take the time to assess, and it is not easy.
Have you figured it out?
I am much closer today than I was yesterday. And I continue to kind of iterate and figure out, okay, what is it do I need in this moment, in this season of life? What are my goals, right? Because they may change, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
Like, I may want something different next week, and I'm going to give myself the grace as long as I've understood why, and as long as it doesn't feel like I'm running from something.
Yeah.
If this no longer serves me, then I'm okay with letting it go.
That is great, because it is easier to just keep doing what you're doing and not take the time to figure out what it is that really serves you. I'm glad that you've learned that one early in life.
Yeah, like this season of life, I've valued the women that have poured into me, and I'm like, okay, what do I need to do to kind of do the work? The work is hard, and it's part of me like trying to relieve stress. I've journaled. I don't do it consistently as I should, but it's been very therapeutic to kind of jot down where it is, how I'm feeling in a moment. And when I go back and reflect, I'm like, wow, like I don't necessarily see the progress that I've made every day. But to go back, I'm like, I'm not even in that same headspace. I'm like, this can't be the same person that's saying this, because my perspective is so much different. And that is the beauty of kind of like this whole journey for me is I am grateful for the constant evolution in my perspective. I don't always have it right, and I don't plan to get it right by X date. It will continue to evolve as I have more information and I can better kind of reframe the circumstances of my life.
I love that you're committed to growing, right?
Yeah.
Because when you see someone who's stuck, it's almost heartbreaking because they're stuck in patterns that they don't have to be as unhappy or as unhealthy as they're choosing to be, and they may not realize it's a choice. So the fact that you're constantly growing and evaluating and reassessing, that just serves you. I wanted to ask, is PCOS genetic?
Based on the things that I've read, I don't think it is.
So what are some of the more common symptoms? And if somebody were starting to have these, what would you advise them to do?
Sure. So one of the big things is irregular periods or like longer periods. So I would have periods that would last 2-3 weeks.
Oh my goodness.
Like, And I did see doctors for that because that was something that had become normal-ish to me.
Even before you had your first child, then?
Yeah, like from like when I was a teenager.
Okay.
And one of the things that doctors back then did was put me on birth control. And birth control helped me regulate my cycle. So I was like, okay, this is workable. But, you know, in my 20s, I was like, I've been on birth control for a really, really long time. And I would really not to like continue to pump my body full of hormones. So I started taking breaks in college just because I'm like, okay, I don't need it right now. So let me just take a year off and see where I felt. what I wasn't really paying attention to back then was that my irregular periods would start back up. And I would then need to go back to birth control to kind of help regulate them. And one of the birth controls that I did use, which was the shot, I gained like 30 pounds in the span of like 6 months, which was insane looking back at it. But I just wasn't really paying attention, Like I was like, okay, whatever. Like it helps. I don't have crazy periods or any periods at all at that point. And I was like, it just didn't feel good for my body. It didn't feel like the natural progression of things.
And not having any periods at that age is probably not that healthy either, right?
For sure. But I knew why, right? Because it's a part of the birth control. It was going to stop periods for long periods of time while I was on it. Back then, if you took the shot, you didn't have periods. So it wasn't abnormal. So I was like, okay, I would rather deal with that than...
Yeah, not having periods sounds like a good thing.
Yeah, because a period that lasts for a month is crazy.
Right.
But I know women in my life that have had that happen to them and suffer in silence. I'm like, no, like that's not normal. It's not okay. Right. And, here's what I did. But, every woman's story is different and every circumstance requires different things. So for me, I'm like, okay, I wasn't really paying attention to the abnormal bleeding. The cysts are a very obvious thing, and that's what stopped me in my track. Right. But other things like difficulty losing weight is also a symptom. Having insulin resistance is also a symptom. So like looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, I've always had these things. But there are things that you could very easily miss if they're like a one-off, And
I feel like PCOS, well, I'm probably ignorant, but it's something that I hadn't really heard of until recently. So I don't know how many women know that it's something to be looking out for, and those symptoms, are clues for that.
I know many women who have various symptoms, and I don't know their full health profile, but if put together, maybe that's a thing that you start the exploration about, right? Like if you're particularly overweight and struggle with like losing weight, maybe it's not the fact that you are, like society say, well, you're continuing to stuff your face. That's not it. Like it is a hormonal thing, and you have to be aware of the different things that are happening, making sure that you're talking to healthcare providers to at least start the conversation, but also educating yourself about the things that, may resonate with you. Like I said, for me, it was reaching out to the various groups and finding information and reading a ton of stuff about, how it impacts folks, and particularly folks who want to have kids. Infertility is another symptom. These are things that, are very much in line with the textbook definition of PCOS. So let's look into it. Let's figure out, what testing that you need to do.
Are there hormone levels in your blood work that were somewhat indicative of potential PCOS diagnosis?
So no, but the indicator for me was the insulin resistance. So my A1C levels were higher when I was pregnant. So that was something to watch for, but they also remained elevated.
Okay.
After the fact, which put me in that borderline type 2 diabetic category.
So the things you're doing to avoid PCOS are serving your health in lots of other ways.
Yeah.
And I wanted to actually follow up on this because I think as a society, we have this very judgy, blamey attitude for people who are overweight. And what that might do is hinder someone from saying, oh, what else might be causing this other than, as you said, oh, I just stuff my face too much, or I don't exercise enough, right? We're really, there could be many conditions that make you overweight and make it hard to lose weight. And the fact that you were like, let me explore what might be going on. Of course, you had the extreme pain that might have contributed to it. One of my messages to all women is do not feel judged because you may not be the weight that society tells you you should be. But if you think something's going on, do some research, get a doctor who supports you and figure it out, as opposed to a doctor that just says, oh, go run some more.
Yeah, I've had doctors who've said that thing. Oh, well, you could lose a couple pounds. So let's start there. And for me, particularly when it came to surgery, I'll be the first to say I was very judgy. I was like, ooh, girl, you didn't have to do all that. Like, what are you doing? You could just go work out and go eat healthy and do what you need to do. it really isn't that simple for people. And it was never that simple for me. So I had to check my own stuff in getting surgery. Because I'm like, okay, I'm looking at other folks. I'm like, all right, I see you lost some weight. You think you're doing something now. But that was my own insecurities.
But we are taught that. I mean, society teaches us that everybody is supposed to look this certain way, which is so not true. Our bodies are different. We process food differently. We want to be healthy. Everyone wants to be healthy, but healthy doesn't look the same for everybody.
Absolutely.
And so those are all things that we have to try to remember ourselves, because that's not what we've been taught, and hopefully teach our children that, this is how we need to look at these things. So
for sure. And one of the things that I think was instrumental for me was giving myself grace. Like, I had to give my body grace. Like, I had to be okay with the fact that, this is the body I've been given. It may not function the way other people's functions, and I'm okay with that. And it took time to process that, right? Like, it has allowed me to grow a whole human. Like,
it's done a lot of amazing things, right?
Like, that is an awesome thing. Like, I am okay with whatever form my body takes. Are there times I wish it looked a little different? Sure, I'm human. But at the same time, it has given me so much. It continues to propel me to do so much that I have to reorient my relationship with my body and be okay with the fact that it may not be able to do these things the way I would like them to do. So I'm not going to be out here parkouring out in these streets. That's not my ministry.
I'm putting my energy somewhere else, maybe.
Yeah. There are other things that I would love to do and enjoy. So leaning into hobbies that are fun for me. Like, I actually love lifting. I really enjoy pushing myself to lift more, get stronger, because I think that's really dope.
Yeah.
Like, and it's empowering to be able to lift a ton of weight and be like, yeah, I did that.
One of the things that has helped me embrace my body image is not focusing on how it looks, but as you said, focusing on what it does for me. So like now, I'm 60 years old. I wear two-piece bathing suits all the time. Not because I think I'm cute or anything like that, but because I don't want to go through those gyrations of going through the bathroom. It's just practical. I'm like, I like swimming. Swimming feels good to me. I am grateful that I know how to swim, that our mother taught us when we were kids how to swim. And so I'm going to do that thing, and I'm going to do it in a comfortable way. And if somebody doesn't like how my body looks in this two-piece bathing suit, that's on them.
You ain't got to lose.
And I have to say, when I go to the beach now, I see everybody in everything. And, before it would be like, oh, can you believe she's wearing that? Oh, but now I'm like, go ahead.
Yeah. I'm like, who gonna judge me? Because what is happening with you?
Yeah, and if you're judging me, keep it to yourself.
Oh, we have that in our family where, like, my weight has fluctuated over the years. And people are like, oh, you've gained some weight. I'm like, I don't need you to tell me whether I've gained weight or not. Because guess what? I got a scale at home.
Oh, I know, girl. And
no, if I can tell people to stop commenting on people's weight loss and weight gain, please.
It's none of our business, quite literally.
This is so great. Thank you, Tsjenna. You've dropped so much knowledge for us to share with our listeners. Appreciate that. We have 2 questions that we generally ask everybody at the end, just to wrap it up. So how do you think being a Black woman has affected your journey with PCOS?
For me, it's the fight to be believed, the fight to advocate for the things that I know that are not currently working in my body. That's been the biggest challenge, is getting people to actually listen and not assume things about me. The most jarring was the battery of STD tests to kind of rule everything out under the sun.
When I told you that I'm not sexually active right now.
Right. Like, I definitely felt a way about that. I'm like, I don't know if you would do that for somebody else. Right. And I had a problem with that. So I have become far more guarded about how I approach folks in the medical profession. They're an important part of the arsenal. They're not the only part of the arsenal, right? And I kind of lead with that. Like, they play a role, but I also play a role. I know my body best because I've lived in it for almost 40 years. So it's that for me. Like, I trust my instinct and intuition, arm myself with as much information as possible, and then figure out what needs to happen in partnership with the medical professionals.
Very nice. And this is our last question. What do you need from a care provider to feel well cared for?
Culturally competent care, empathy.
Tell us what culturally competent care looks like, and then tell us more about empathy.
So for me, culturally competent care is understanding that we all have different lived experiences. That's one of the reasons why I intentionally seek out Black women doctors moving forward. Because there's a shared experience that matters to me, that I don't have to explain my personhood to you, because you understand the things that I come with walking in the door, because the world treats you the very same as they treat me. And then empathy, just especially in the medical profession, just matters. Like, people are going through all types of things, and quite often, particularly in a hospital setting, those are likely some of the worst times of their life. Be a little bit more empathetic about folks who are coming into your space. Like, it's not just about your practice, it's about the person.
Good. Thank you, Tsjenna. This conversation has been everything. I'm so joyful to see you in such a good place, looking beautiful, looking healthy.
Thank you. Yes, and teaching us.
And teaching us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Of course, thank you both. I love this platform. It's super important for taking care of yourself as a woman of color. Like, that really matters. So thank you.
Thanks for listening. Want to hear our take on this conversation? Check out our After the Show episode right here. For resources related to today's topic, see the show notes.
If you want to support Body Wealth, please subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. We'd also love it if you give us a 5-star rating and write a review letting us know what you love about the show.
The Body Wealth podcast shares personal stories to inspire you. It does not constitute medical advice. For that, we encourage you to work with a trusted healthcare provider. We also want to remind you that the views expressed by our guests are their own.
This podcast is dedicated to our mother, Jean Fernandez Barbour, who showed us what advocating for yourself really looks like.